Okay.
Why is that so high up?
Just give us a moment while we place the camera in a better place.
That's definitely not going to help. How's that? Is that better?
I mean, that's adequate. Okay. So I don't really do a lot of actual MBTI content on this channel, even though in every thumbnail there's an MBTI term. But I thought in this one, we had the idea, I guess, to do some sort of type interaction, which won't so much be an interaction as it will be an interview, although it may be more, certainly could be just an interaction. And a discussion about how the cognitive functions manifest in each type, which may look differently depending on the type, and how the cognitive functions combine together make them look and manifest differently. So with regard to both of our types respectively, if I've got all of the if I've got the function ordering correct, we both prefer with intuition extroverted intuition.
Yeah.
And whereas the INTP prefers TI over TE, ENFPs have tertiary TE. And for the INTP shadow functions, the secondary function or the auxiliary function for the ENFP is FI, which is the INTP's weakest function, which I can attest to so far as I can understand FI. And David's, who's our ENFP subject today, your inferior function is SI, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he has inferior SI, which I believe calling your fourth function the inferior function is not really an adequate label for it. I think it really should just be called your midpoint in some way. It's both a weak and strong function relatively.
Or maybe it's like the function that grounds you.
Yeah, but it's your inferior function. We'll just use that language. And that would be my tertiary function, if I'm typed correctly. So I'd have somewhat more of that than you, but only a small amount more.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know the orderings for your shadow functions at all, but they would simply be the opposite, the introverted or extroverted opposite of whatever your dominant functions are in the same order. So
I would be an INFJ then. Would be my
NI would be your fifth.
NIFE.
FE would be your sixth.
SE.
TI would be your seventh, and then SE
Mm-hmm.
would be your eighth. Whereas for me, it would be TENI SEFI. So those are the shadow functions, to the extent you even believe in those or think that they're conscious in any way, which I think they have to play some role.
Yeah.
There could be more than 8 functions, of course. I'm willing to consider others or eliminate some. But for the sake of exposing people to sort of the rudimentary elements of MBTI and the cognitive typology variant, the socionics variant of MBTI, which differs from your typical David Kersey, Isabel Myers-Briggs kind of more rudimentary MBTI, which is only based on the 4 dichotomies of intuition, extroversion, introversion, sensing, face. You know what I mean? Anyway, I won't go too deep into that because it's not really what we're going to be talking about. But in any case, being a lazy INTP, I came up with a pretty efficient, which is synonymous with lazy in many cases for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not, a way of structuring the interaction, or what will ultimately be an interview, because really it will be more of an interaction. Because I'll have my own takes on your takes.
Right.
And you'll have your own takes on my takes.
Yes.
Hopefully all of this will occur in one take, in another sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
But we have known each other for about
over 10 years, probably at this
a
point.
very considerable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're both around the age of 25, so full development. We've left puberty now, across the reproductive horizon into the low T years. So that'll be fun. But in any case, Hopefully, he's definitely typed correctly, but my type's been contested even by me. So I'm just going on a testing that was performed on me by host Eric on the TWFP channel, just to plug that, which would benefit both of us.
Yeah.
So,
well,
not
you're
that
certainly
matters.
you're certainly an NTP.
Yeah, an NTP
Mhm.
for sure. So no NI and no TE in me, unfortunately. But in any case, the way that I've structured it, the efficiently lazy or lazily efficient way of structuring it was to simply go through each of his functions and ask him what he thinks it is. And then that leads into a deeper discussion of what we think the functions are defined as, not so much how it specifically manifests in his behavior or thought, but more so into how we define them in essence from an intuitive perspective, rather than any kind of you don't want to know his day-to-day routine or anything like that. So that'd be boring. So I guess first we could start with NE and what you think NE is, what it means to you, and how you use it, and what kinds of how does it make you think, or what is it as a way of thinking?
Yeah, I think NE is sort of like a ravenous pattern-seeking function where you're always trying to find, or I can't help it but just find patterns in the world and loosely connect them, Yeah. And I would say that in relation to its opposite, SI, it sort of makes me very future possibilities of things. And it's a function that
you think about possibilities.
Yes, exactly. About possibilities, the possibility of everything. So
see, that's what NE is to me. I'll notice, whereas NI-TE users or even NI-FE users will have this static, vision they might have, which is intuition, as it's traditionally defined.
Yeah.
We would struggle more as NE users because our vision can shift day to day and mood to mood.
Yes.
So whereas NI a little bit more of a focused kind of possibility seeking function, it's a little bit more static than NE, and the nature of NE is a kind of, to me at least, it is a kind of creative chaos, whereby which thoughts will just kind of come out of me. It's not a conscious thing,
Yeah, and
it's like my brain's just spitting out connections.
And you can't sit still in one subject for too long. Like there's always this desire to
it's like an ADD into it.
Like you want to keep cycling new ideas through, else they get stale and boring. As soon as you're able to, as soon as I'm able to integrate an idea in a way that I can identify with, that's enough. I want to move on to the next thing. But specifically
an idea you identify with through FI, which is an identity function.
Exactly. Which is the difference between, say...
Whereas I don't identify with the ideas.
Yes. I'm interested in how an idea can be useful to me.
To you personally. Rather than useful in some other more abstract, larger sense, maybe.
Yeah.
Even though it is a pretty large sense.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's... it is very ravenous and it can be very restless. It doesn't really make for a relaxed person per se.
No. But it's very useful because I feel like I can get the gist of something very quick because it's like I just digest an idea very fast. But it's not. I wouldn't say that it's. I wouldn't say that it's. My understanding of those ideas are very deep. That's the drawback. It's that given my typology, I'll digest the idea, find what I identify with it, and that's that, unless there's some sort of external reason for me to continue pursuing it.
Yeah. I think primarily NE is just about ideation in a very loose kind of general sense. It's just generating ideas. I mean, and most importantly, I mean, thinking functions, feeling functions, sensing functions can do that, but it's very much, when we think about ideation, we think of NE. If you're schooled in MBTI, we don't even really think about NI.
No, I think NI is more the refining of ideas than it is the
and so it's more focused, And ideation is an inherently unfocused process. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure. Yeah, I could say that. You could say
Because
that.
it's not scrutinizing, it's not hyper-fixating, it's breadth
Right.
rather than depth.
Right.
Because in some, I was having a conversation with another friend recently. We were playing a video game called Humans Fall, which is a very good video game. It's very well designed. But there are two types of game players with these types of sandbox kind of problem-solving games. You have breadth people who are taking into account the full landscape and all the possibilities within it, and all the resources you can use, which I would associate with NE. And you have depth people, which may be more NI, who are testing out different
Mechanics
options,
and stuff.
mechanics,
Like,
and so I was guy I was playing it with was probably also an NTP, and so we were kind of having a good time with having a good time with the breadth approach. Although mine was a bit more of a depth approach.
well, that might be due to
which is the auxiliary
Yeah,
NE rather
yeah.
than the primary
secondary
NE.
any.
Whereas he may be ENTP even and have primary NE.
Yeah.
So maybe the TI, and this is something I realized a while back too, right? So with our relationship, we have NE, right? So it's some sort of TI. With me, it's I'm juggling between NE and TI, mostly TI though. And in INTPs, though there is the NE auxiliary, it's more restrained by TI, which is the logical judging function, you know.
Mhm.
So NE's kind of loose leaps of association, creative association, are more restrained, I think, in the INTP because it's just the more dominant TI, which is more scrutinizing of the ideas. Whereas the thing I realized about you as an ENFP, which is that you're not really restrained by, you're restrained more by the values function FI than the logic function TI.
Yeah.
And that leads you to be a bit more unencumbered when you're just kind of ideating and throwing things out there.
Yeah. And I think
ideas.
the difficulty of that is that I don't really. It's hard for me to settle down into a sense of self consistently. Because I'm always trying to, because NE is very unbridled. It's very much like you always want that rush of exploring something new. And when you're like that, it can be hard to settle down somewhere and just kind of focus on one thing.
Yeah.
Which I think a more mature dominant NE user, that's their struggle that they're trying to achieve in maturity. How do I use this strength for a better good as opposed to just, basically living off the high of it? Basically.
Yeah. It's a very that's the thing is, I don't know, there have been some strains of thinking on forums that I've been on that say that in terms of IQ correlations, NE is up there, and NE is very much associated with certain types of pattern synthesis that are tested on IQ tests, and so typically the NE users have this. There's this maybe probably untrue stereotype, right? That there's this correlation there at the very least.
If your dominant function is an interfacing function and your dominant function is an idea-seeking function, then you interface with ideas, and so that's that would.
I mean, it ends up just kind of being like, so that's NE. It's very much associated with like wit. Like when you find someone you're encountering as like comedically or witty in any other sense, it's like probably there's some NE operating there, because wit's very much about the speed of creative association.
Yes, but it needs to be backed up by something just as potent for things to land, right?
Yeah, it needs to be backed up by a sense-making function too.
Because NE is just always, it's up in the air, and you can make associations that don't even make any sense at all.
I find with NE, it's almost like perspectives become a kind of like it's like it can take, it's like in a kind of matrix of perspectives. And it's like, well, these people would look at this perspective, would see it this way. This perspective would see it this way. This perspective would see it. And you can filter, whereas other people may be locked into a specific perspective. NE can just say, well, I'm going to yank out, I'm going to pull this out of my ass. And this is a new perspective. And what about this?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think it's very interesting to me to see how different people think. And even like, with some, like when thinking about politics or something, it's hard for me sometimes to form an actual opinion on my own about something, because I can see how people think about things and approach them. And I try to bridge that gap.
I know that on the TWFP channel that TI is conceived of as a frame questioning function rather than a frame assuming function like TE.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that applies to NE as well. You kind of realize, oh, well, that's just a looking at it. That's not a fact, right? It's just it's a perspective rather than a fact. And then you can take perspective filters, and you can then you're looking, like I noticed with my NE operating with my thinking about MBTI. Like the other day, I was stopped at I was stopped at a stoplight, and I was like looking at a building, and I was like, this is how I'm seeing it with my dominant function, TI, I'm looking at the mechanics and the architecture of the building and everything, and how it's constructed, and whether that makes any sense as a design in terms of its engineering and everything else. Then I'm like, how would all the other, so you see I'm engaging in NE perspective shifting.
Right.
How would FE see it? Or maybe FE would see it as like, oh, well, those colors are in poor taste.
Yeah.
And then maybe FI would see it as, oh, that is a color that I like, and it relates to my interests.
Maybe SI would be like, oh, I could see it. Well, it looks like the building's in disrepair or something like that. Like,
yeah, or then NE would see it as like this cartoonish like thing that it can
like
take apart, like an animation.
Right.
And then NI would see it as, well, how has this building style evolved over time?
How is it related to other building styles?
Yeah.
Right.
And SE would just see it as, oh, that's just a donut shop over there. I'm gonna go get some donuts. SI would see it as, how many times have I seen this building before, and does it relate to like my past?
Mm-hmm.
And is it familiar to me?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I was kind of doing that NE thing of perspective shifting there between the functions. So we talked about NE. What about FI? Because I've already mentioned that FI is pretty obscure to me, and that would make sense because it would be my
weakest function. Yeah.
So to be honest with you, I have no idea what it really is. I mean, I have an idea of what it is. I just don't know if it's a good idea. So
yeah.
What is it to you?
Yeah,
which
I would
is itself
say
an FI question, because you're
right.
relating it to yourself, which is kind of my understanding of what FI is in some sense. But
well, I would say just like with TI, FI is an individuating function, meaning that you
okay, that's good. Yeah,
it's an internal analytical function, but instead of dealing with logic and facts, it deals with values, feelings, identity. So a lot of my,
but not group.
But not, well, it is in part related to the group, but it's more of how am I different than everybody else, as opposed to how am I the same.
But in terms of group values, would you say that it contrasts or complements with them?
It contrasts. Like my whole life, I felt sort of like there's this barrier between me and other people that's hard to bridge. And it's only through developing and becoming confident in my own sense of self that I've been able to be confident socially, realizing what my values are and just sticking with them, Yeah. And
but they're your values.
Yes. And I would say that I use,
because FE would be concerned with whether those values are valid in a social sense.
Yes. And I don't really care what other people, I care what other people think as it affects me. Like,
well, everyone does. That's not really a function.
But but I don't let it stop me from trying to be myself. And I think that FI can get you in trouble because I think there can be this desire to go so against the grain, to be so rebellious that you cause trouble and you do things that are not just socially inept, but like are hurtful to other people because.
Would you say that FI leads to like consistency in your values that you hold?
I would say there has always been
And do you think that NE scatters that consistency?
That's a good question. I think there is a consistency found in FI, but NE it's more of like FI grounds me in some sense, right? Because it's like it's hard to describe.
Well, it's
but
a values function. That's what values do.
Yeah. I would say for me, it's more of a sense of how things relate to me, and that's where I start with.
Does it give you a consistent sense of self as well?
It makes me care about wanting to have a sense of self. And okay, here it is.
But the NE again would scatter the consistency.
I have a grandized sense of me being a unique individual.
That's what I think FI kind of is.
Yes, it's like, I'm a unique snowflake. It's very independent and wants to be seen as being this independent person.
Yeah,
and
that's good. That's healthy.
Yes, and
it's
I
a
think
superpower in a way.
Well, for me, I value being known for my strengths, and I value those strengths being different than other people's.
Yeah, so, that's kind of how I would conceive of FI too.
Yes.
Now, see, I don't. It would be my weakest, so I will tell you my sense of self is far less consistent. I sometimes don't even have one.
So how does that? I don't understand that. How do you kind of go about life?
That's my only understanding of FI and my lack of it. If I'm typed correctly, and you see there's a paradox there because that's actually a sense of self. Not having a sense of self is a sense of self. So there's a bit of a paradox there. I know I have enough of a sense of self to say that I really don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think,
but that's why, like, it would lead. It kind of can lead, I think, maybe to my values not being consistent or individualistic per se, even though they are. But I don't care to preserve them as individualistic. It doesn't really. It's not important for me to rebel or go against the grain necessarily. I feel uncomfortable doing that because
do you feel like it's important to express yourself through, like, not through your thinking, but through the way you look, like the objects you have? So for me, that's
I have no concern with it.
So when you walked into this apartment and saw my stuff, I attribute a value to the things that I put out. I put things out for a reason. I have everything out is for a reason. So that you look, in my mind, it's like, okay,
that's what I would see FI.
Yeah, someone looks at that, and what does that say about who David is, right?
Yeah.
Or who I am? And so, and some of that,
yes,
so
no, that's
a lot of these objects, and so I attribute.
I have none of it.
Yes,
because you'll look at my room. It's just
functional.
It's just functional. It has no. I don't try to bring any character to it necessarily. So yeah, I do wish I had more FI for sure. I think it would. I think that it definitely leads to me in a value sense.
Yeah, well, I think for me,
there's not a center. There's not like an ethical center there.
Well, I get pushed around too, and that's just because I want to be liked.
Yeah,
and I think that's everybody.
Yeah,
in a specific way.
But my FI seems to be so primitive that I'll have moments of FI where I'm like, oh, this is my purpose. This is my existential purpose and everything else. And then the mood will change. It's gone. I have no recollection of it.
So you pursuing like a career or something, it for you is more of like the practical things it bring, or like it
has no relationship to any attempt to identify myself.
But it's like an intellectual interest, though. It's not like.
It's just an interest.
It's just an interest, but it's not like, this is who I am.
Career is not identity.
Gotcha.
Anyway, for me. I don't care about a title or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I used to a little bit more. Now I don't at all. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. But
it's neither. I mean,
I think it ends up being a good thing.
It has its perks,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I feel like I wouldn't be flexible enough to just completely change my career to something else. Like, I'd be miserable because I have to have
my lack of FI and my NE will kind of make me all the time just be like, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that, I could do it. that or that or that or that or that.
Mhm.
And then imagine 100 different lives that I could be living or things I could be doing. And then ultimately doing nothing but ideating in the process. You know?
Mhm.
So that makes it difficult. You know? So that's FI. That's actually a way more productive discussion about FI than I ever thought it would be. Because it was a total mystery to me as to what it would necessarily be.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like identity values, like an identity and
Yes.
ethical and social.
Yeah.
And individualistic, ultimately.
And attributing a personal value to things that otherwise wouldn't be there.
And this is the dysfunction that I like talking about because I understand it very intimately because I think it exists. I mean, like any other function, it's like, okay, does that really exist as a discrete type of cognition or feeling? But with TE, which is your tertiary, I know it exists. I can observe it, and we can prove that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes MBTI, for all you MBTI haters out there, that actually means that one dimension of MBTI does exist and that it's not a total hoax.
Right.
So to me, tertiary TE, right? So you have tertiary TE, and I have, that'd be my 6th, right? So
Mm-hmm. No, it'd be your 5th.
My 5th, okay. Oh yes, it would be my 5th. Like, because we were, whether I'm NTP, so in one case it would be 6, the other it would be
right.
5th.
Right.
But we'll just go with whatever the title of the video is. Anyway, to me, like TE is just concerned with utility, right? Human utility, practical utility. It's a utilitarian framework of looking at about thinking, ideas, action, values.
Yes.
Things.
It's a physical logic.
It's a practical logic.
Yes. It's practical. It's a practical logic.
It's not abstract.
Let's cut out the fat.
Yes.
Let's cut out all the fat and let's just get to the bone of things.
Yeah. It's good for
it's good for getting things done, but it's not
in the real world.
Yes,
precisely.
Yes.
In the human world.
Yeah. So it's concerned with efficiency.
Yes.
And sort of maximizing.
Results.
Yes, maximizing.
It's logic applied to the task of getting results.
Yeah. So
in the real world,
and that manifests itself differently in every person. But for me, it's sort of a tool that I use just to achieve the goals of my FI, basically.
Right. So it's just kind of there is like I read this article. There's this beautiful MBTI type description site that is about 11 years old now, and it's the best written type descriptions I've ever encountered on the web. It's so well written. It's ridiculous. I'll link it in the video description. But TE is described in intuition types as just the faithful accountant to intuition.
Yeah.
And it just brings all of intuition's ideas into reality.
Yeah.
It's there to make sure and fact check and logic check. It's not primary. It's just kind of an assistant.
Yeah, it's like the secretary or like the data analyst that comes along, right?
Yeah.
Or you could picture like grabbing your bag of tools and heading to the site.
Yeah. To me, it's so weak that I can't even. Oh God. I know this is weak in me. Like I can, like ordering my day is difficult. Organizing things is difficult. Efficiency is almost non-existent. I don't really do things for
the sake of efficiency. Yeah.
Although I must to exist, so I do to an extent. But it's not my. I don't get off on efficiency or results per se.
Yeah.
Like the TE is very concerned with like outcomes, whereas TI may be more concerned with process.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Well, I think TI is more concerned about actually getting it right, or
it being
having a full picture.
Yeah, having it validating it in a logical sense rather than a practical sense.
Whereas I think TI wants the full picture, whereas I think TE just cuts it and then just kind of shows you like the cross section.
It wants to see only what it's useful to see.
Yeah, I sort of used the analogy earlier
with a consciousness beyond utility.
Exactly. And I related it earlier to sort of like it being like Occam's razor, where you're concerned with whatever solution is the most assured, as opposed to thinking about the TE basically posits the best explanation is the most simple one.
Yeah.
Whatever is the simplest thing.
In the previous video that I did on the relationship between T and TI, is it's like, I'll notice that in us too, when we're engaging in thinking, right, you'll pull TE logic out, and then I'll realize, and then it's good. I mean, it's always good logic. There's nothing wrong with using TE logic, and it's logic in its own right. But you're more content than I am to just kind of say, well, that's a fact.
Yeah, really. And I would say that I'm also more content with relying on, like, I'm trained to be in science and in my degree, and I think I'm more content with kind of saying, well, they already did the research. I'm sure that like I'll check.
That's when I
check
notice.
It, right?
Yeah.
So you'll
trust in experts, right?
You trust. It's kind of you trust an authority in a sense.
Yeah, TE is about group. EJR&D put it in one of his videos that it's about group logic. It's about consulting the consensus logic of things, like what most people believe, and then that's kind of like FE2, but in a logical way rather than an ethical way. And then, yeah, I mean, climate change, experts say it's happening, so it's definitely happening. Whereas you'll notice there are some fringe TI users who are like, climate change is a hoax.
Yeah, well, and then that's
or TE users that are just purely selfish and
right. And I want to talk a bit about the dichotomy of having TE and FI and how that's related. So
that's good. Yeah.
If you have dominant TE and you have inferior FI, I think you're more likely to make to question authority, I think, in some sense, because your inferior FI is so kind of rampant that it makes you more rebellious against.
No. There's a conflict there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think
individual values versus group logic.
Yeah, and you're less likely, I think, because my functions are so they cooperate so well together. I think I can discern between what authorities I should listen to versus which ones I shouldn't. Right? Like, I think having your judgment functions together makes you a more critical thinker in some ways, because you're able to kind of discern what's good and what's not. And in this case, which authority is the right authority? Obviously, no.
I mean, FI will tell you I'm the authority, right. And TE will tell you it's a little more complicated.
Yes.
So FI is more like I'm the authority over what I believe, and then TE is more like
an authority outwardly.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated.
There's an authority and I would also say in our conversations, I would say I tend to be more I think being exposed to someone who uses TI has kind of made me understand that TE isn't always the best solution, and that there isn't always
it's the
right
practical
answer.
Solution.
Yeah, it's the practical solution.
It's always good enough.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's totally wrong.
Yeah.
Because you have to have the TI to check the TE to make sure that the TE is.
Yeah, and in some ways, it does not make me a fantastic thinker logically, because I rely so much on what has been written already, or
Whereas the NE may make you a pretty fantastic thinker creatively, though.
So I think the NE makes me reach out for more stuff to digest.
Yeah,
and then I kind of
process.
The TE kind of glue it together in a sense,
it's an assistant. TE is basically just the logical assistant to intuition and feeling.
So instead of I mean, it's not like I don't think about things on my own, but I kind of like to have a guided tour, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I like to have someone who's already thought of it, explain it to me, and then
and then you individuate it with NE and FI.
So in a sense, it's like
you put your own spin on it.
Someone choose the food for me, and then I take it and spit out what I don't like.
Yeah, or they make the food for you, and then it's a weird analogy.
I mean, I think it works.
Yeah, I've already described what T kind of. It's not. I'm not pitifully weak in it. I mean, I can strategize and just fine and be efficient enough to make things work. It's done. Sensibly.
That's all you need from it, really.
Yeah, and TE would tell me that that's enough. TI tells me it's still inadequate.
Yeah,
because it is. ultimately. There are more optimal ways of doing, but TI can do strategy and efficiency and all of that too. So I think it ultimately, having any strong thinking function doesn't really make you strong necessarily in both, but that's why it's not my inferior, right? Or it's not my, I don't know what you call the lowest. It's not my weakness. It's not my weakness, you know, but it's weak.
Yeah.
There's not really much else I can really say about TE, honestly, in this.
Yeah, that deserves its own discussion, actually.
But it's far more interesting to me than talking about SI, because
SI is kind of like the Wonder Bread function in a way.
Yeah, I know. And SI users are like, I don't know. It's an underrated function, in my opinion.
I think in my stack, it's like the Wonder Bread function. That's what I meant to say. Like,
yeah. So what is it to you? Like, how do you think that manifests in the ENFP?
Well, I think for me, SI is what grounds me, and that's sort of like my attachment to like memory and the past, and that's generally it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really it.
Can you enter with your inferior SI? Can you enter like mental playgrounds and landscapes that are shaped by
places that I've
your
built?
memory?
Yeah, it's like places I've built. I could explore like my
or that were built.
Yes, but the thing is I realized that it's like a fragmented thing. It's not what really was, because it's sort of
your
like,
NE is
my NE has taken over.
Yeah.
I would say,
oh God. Operating on the NE-SI axis is exactly that. For me. Exactly.
Yes.
It's this. That was NE takes all of the data from SI and then fantasizes about this past moment that NE is embellishing very, very much.
Yeah, it's very much,
it's
I think,
accurate enough, but it's not a true representation. Right?
Yeah.
Because the NE is maligning it with its own idealism and its own, creativity and imagination.
Yeah, in many ways, it's looking up at the stars and seeing the stars and realizing that actually the whole sky was a whole picture of something, and just what's left are these little fragments.
Yeah.
And
tertiary SI though does allow me to like go back to past moments with a lot of vividness.
I don't have any control over that. It just happens to me when that happens.
It happens to me too, but pretty frequently. But I don't have any control over it.
I've actually, it's funny. Like, as I've gotten a little bit older, it's like I have these flashes of memory of something I haven't thought of in years.
I'll have that sometimes.
And it's just like when it hits me, it's just like I kind of try to keep it going because I don't want to lose it.
Fades for me.
But it's like
getting up from sleep and forgetting the dream.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say SI also is a function that allows you to relate to your internal state of how your body feels.
Oh, yes.
And
but with me, you do it too if it's inferior. With me, it's tertiary. INTPs are known for engaging in SI, what I call SI neglect. It's like, I don't need to sleep, I don't need to eat, fuck all that shit. That's boring. With you, it's probably the same thing in many ways.
Yeah, it's something
I have to care about it.
Yeah, well, for me, it's like, for me, it's like overeating, overstimulating myself. It's really about trying to reduce the overstimulation, probably would be the way to describe it. And
there's the self-destructive aspect to inferior and tertiary SI, I think, and weak SI.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's not conscious self-destruction.
Because it's just boring to maintain yourself.
Oh, it's so boring.
It's so boring to like eat the same way every day because it's healthy and like.
Oh no, it's so boring.
It's so much better, to like go get the 6-pack or go get the or the candies,
smoke a cigarette,
smoke a stogie, whatever it is.
It's nice to break with. But the SI neglect is bad. Now I don't SI neglect anymore.
Yeah, and so I think part of maturing in our type is to develop a sense of like, because I'll work out 3 times a week and I try to get sleep.
Yeah,
and I think a maturity is part of like just strengthening that function enough where you don't have to think about it. You just do it. It's a habit, right? You just do it.
Yeah.
Although it's like one thing can slip and I'm just done. I'm just done.
Well, I envy the dominant SI users because they're just like, yeah, that's what I do, and I do it well, and my body's in shape, and I'm healthy, and it's not going anywhere.
Well, they're either just
they enjoy it.
Yeah,
they enjoy the maintenance, the physical maintenance of the body and of health, and of all of that. They derive pleasure maybe in it.
Yeah, but I guess
And they count their calories. And they
but I guess
enjoy
the
all that.
weakness is that they are very ingrained in their routine, which that would be the weakness of having that dominance.
Yeah. And there may be things possible outside of their routine, that they're not really considering, perhaps.
Which, not to say that I don't have a routine, and that I haven't had habits that I've developed over time, but just to say that for me, those habits are definitely ones that are very sloppy in comparison, and I have bad habits that I just have had a hard time breaking, like for me right now, like the biggest one is the habit of just like mindlessly using my phone and like,
I'm trying to break that too.
It's just off. It's just like the NE just constantly.
I'm trying to read instead.
Yes. Yeah.
That's why I try to use SE. That's me trying to use NINT and SI.
Yeah. Try to do something that.
Whereas normally I just go on my phone and
reduce the stimulation and just
not mindlessly, but
it's not mindless.
Frivolously.
Yeah. Well, phone use on its own isn't mindless, but when you're doing it mindlessly, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easy. It's easy to be mindless with that. But anyway, to get back to SI. So yeah, it's my inferior function. And I would say that
for me, it's just like, I need this much sleep. I've got to eat something. Make sure I'm not overeating. Make sure I'm not under eating. Make sure I'm not under or oversleeping.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a self-maintenance function in a way.
It's a self-preservation.
Yeah. And I think there is some degree of like, how much control do you have over those habits to self-preserve?
Yeah. And how much do you want to self-preserve?
Yeah.
Too,
Yeah.
How much do you value the self-preservation aspect?
Mm-hmm.
Which, if FI is kind of a self function, maybe it compensates in that area for your weak SI, because it wants to self-preserve too. Because it's about identity in the self. Whereas, unfortunately, in my case, I do have my SI is good enough. That's the weird thing with my type. I don't feel it's tertiary. I feel it's as weak as the ENTPs.
Yeah, which is why I would say that, just like you are an NTP, I'm an NFP. And degree of it's like, I know what functions are there, but throughout
high school, my SI was pitifully horrible.
Oh, mine too.
Yeah, I remember both of us were suffering.
We were just two like talking heads, basically.
Yeah, we were going on like just sleep deprivation and sugar,
coffee, caffeine, and social attention for me. Which
just sugar, sleep deprivation.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how we focused on.
Well, I think we've both gone through a period of introversion, where we've kind of we've come out of it and sort of developed a sense of self outside of,
Well, neuroticism kind of years of adulthood, I think.
That gets better after
all these different things to manage that are important. Whereas in high school, it's like, nah, you don't have anything like that.
Yeah, it's like you don't have the frontal lobe to like.
And now, of course, we're at the age where we're at that point in our development where frontal lobe's fully developed. So we're a little bit more self-regulated.
Yep.
That will decline though.
Yeah, it's all downhill from here, Jacob.
We'll just return to who we were in high school.
Yeah, well, eventually we'll be wearing diapers too. So, it's just reversal. Very slow.
That'll be absolutely. I will keep myself healthy enough. I'll never have to wear a diaper unless I was totally just paralyzed or something.
Hey, if I start wearing diapers, I will shit my pants with glee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it predisposes us maybe to memory problems in old age.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
Having a weak SI.
I was just talking.
The weak, like past recollection, experiential memory.
Yes.
Contributes as we age maybe to more. If that's already weak in us per our type, then we're probably going to. I don't think I'll ever get dementia. That's not that bad.
I think it's more. I think what it is like, and I was talking to my girlfriend about this. I think she's an INFP, which makes her more kind of like a someone who records the interactions more than
the tertiary side.
Because I'm like constantly distracted by my own thoughts, like when I'm in an environment, and so I think literally what it is what are you focused on? Are you focused on your immediate environment or what you're thinking?
And in both of us, the weak SE would also lead to being totally distracted from the physical world too. Yeah.
So it's not, I think I don't,
which I mean, that's more like that.
Yeah. So I think the lack of memory is more of just a lack of having focused on.
There's a paradox there too, because it's like, I'm aware, right, that I'm distracted from the physical world. So in that way, I am aware of the physical world. and to some extent, because that is required in knowing that I'm distracted by the physical world.
Sure. Yeah, but I guess you're putting the cart before the horse in that experience, right? It's like, does that make sense?
Yeah, because if I'm aware that I'm distracted from the physical world,
You're feeling the effects of.
then I should have enough of the
Yeah,
awareness to be able to say that I'm distracted.
Yeah. Yeah, but in the moment, it's hard to notice. I think for me, it's only like in retrospect am I aware that I was like, oh, I haven't been fucking paying attention.
Yeah,
You know, I haven't been paying attention.
Or I think, okay, so we'll gone through SI. Now, for you, it would be NI. And this is where it gets way more fun.
That's where it gets kind of like I'm just spitballing. Basically.
This is where it gets way more fun because everyone knows about how the top 4 functions manifest in any type.
Yeah.
It's less clear how they manifest. The shadow functions manifest in any type.
Yeah.
So how would you say NI?
I would say NI is the function that mystifies me the most, in how it functions because it's so foreign to me. And really, I only appreciate the products of NI and the things that are said by people that I think are dominant NI users, which is there's a depth to it. There's a depth. There's a almost like I would say any connects parts of the world together, whereas I think NI almost breaks like the world a little bit, like to form a very deep understanding of something. And I don't know if that makes sense.
It's yeah, maybe in terms of intuition operating, NI is depth, whereas NE is breadth.
And maybe we could say that NI develops its own patterns and rules as opposed to
it's individuated like in the introverted function.
Like we said
so
before,
it may be more subjective.
So maybe it develops its own understanding of patterns between things versus NE, which I think is much more of a surface level in the sense that it really does connect things, but it doesn't dive any deeper than it needs to. Whereas NI, I think it's just like, it's like going off the deep end in some cases, depending on where it is.
But I like the definition of NI that it's just being able to, it's like, it's aware of certain types of pattern. NE is aware, so they're both pattern synthesis in a way, because that's what intuition is. But they're different types of pattern synthesis. So I think the term I would use for it is that for NI, it's about perceiving time patterns. Time-based patterns over time. And NE may be about perceiving not necessarily time-based patterns, but some other types of patterns, right? Reducing it to a kind of pithy label is hard for NE, but at least for NI, it seems to be concerned with time patterns.
I can see that.
If they're both pattern synthesis, NI would be time patterns. What would NE be in terms of patterns?
Spatial pattern, kind of loose,
or verbal patterns.
Yeah, like patterns in the present.
I know NE is good with verbal patterns because it recognizes the elasticity of words very well. I mean,
yeah,
it can throw up a word from another context where it's never into one that's never used, but it would still make sense.
Yeah, and I think another way to characterize
whereas NI seems to be a little bit mute in some cases.
And to characterize the two, maybe you could also say that NE kind of is more bounding and rebounding, whereas NI is much more progressing and tunneling. Like it's a force.
Yeah,
it's a force itself. Whereas I think NE more bounces. Yes, where NE kind of more bounces towards its direction. NI is like a train.
Yeah,
going towards a direction. Which
one's a archer, and the other is a juggler, or something like that.
I see what you're saying there. It's how the thought or idea is directed.
Yeah.
In that analogy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it mystifies me because it's so, it's just so impressive. And I would say it can kind of get off kilter.
It's overrated. NI users are regarded as like prophets and visionaries and everything else. And it's
because they can make accurate predictions.
That's what I'm saying. Time patterns.
Patterns. Yeah. So. You predict where that arrow is going to land.
I mean, Terence McKenna's whole theory of the time wave is all about time patterns and how novelty increases over time and everything else. So
Sure. Yeah.
which he's an INFJ. So, okay. Yeah. And NI and me is also totally mysterious. I can use it, and I'm pretty good at it, but it's not natural. I've had to develop it.
Yeah, it's more of I have to follow the template of how someone else. It's like I can follow along, but I can't.
NI almost has that like chess-like short-term memory where it's like, oh, this happened then, and this is the implication. It's a kind of implication reasoning via implication and consequences, in that way. And so, yeah, but I can do that and predict future trends and everything, but it's not my most active faculty, and I don't really care about it too much.
Yeah, I appreciate people who I think have it. Like I appreciate.
And I don't think about this. Oh yeah. So how much do you think about the future? Because it's associated with that.
I think about the future a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always thinking about where I'm headed, but I think for me, it's a.
See, I'm not really. I'm not. I live more in the present. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm constantly thinking about the future.
And I can't really put myself into any kind of a future moment.
Yeah,
like
I mean, even like right now as I'm talking, there's a part of me that's present, but then there's another part of me that's like, okay, like what's going to happen at this time, and what am I going to do? Go to bed, and then go to bed, and then like it extends all the way out to like what's happening in 5 years from now, what's happening in 10 years from now. It's like I'm always constantly thinking of.
Yeah, see, I don't do that. Yeah, I wish I did though.
No, you don't. It's exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
It's exhausting,
right? And it's ultimately pointless.
And it annoys everybody that's around you because you're never present ever.
Unless you have a long-term, very complex goal you want to achieve, then it's useless.
Yes.
Not useless totally because you have to think about tomorrow and implications and everything. But with the NI user, that's a bit more powerful.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So FE's next.
Oh geez, FE. I've got some. I'm sorry. I'm not. I have enough FE to know not to offend FE users.
Well, yeah. Well, you've got your own issues with FE, just given how it factors into your personality.
Yeah. No, I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is FE for you?
FE is like the desire to integrate, control.
Right.
Social interactions.
Social integration is an important element.
And it's concerned with social hierarchies and like being.
Oh God, I know. Right.
Well, and it comes with it kind of a gregariousness of wanting to be inclusive and
it may. Agreeableness maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think the feeling functions are correlated with being agreeable. And that
you think FI is agreeable?
I think both feeling functions can be. Yeah.
I think the individualistic nature of FI would be agreeable.
I mean, maybe that's possible. I only when in that paper that I read, they just said feeling in general. They didn't look at cognitive functions. They just looked at feeling.
I know that FE has to be agreeable by definition.
It desires to be agreeable to and it's concerned with conformity in some sense.
That's the thing. I have to be very careful with the way I talk about FE because FE is a very common function. I don't want to offend a large part of.
Well, that's just what it is, and I think our society is built on FE, and to some extent, like the social norms that we
all of that
like the social graces, like the.
I'm fine with adapting to them as long as they serve me, but if they start to oppose me. I grow I can become a bit more antagonistic. Of FE.
Well, the immature FE user, if posed with a social,
which I realize is immature, but
well, the immature FE user, when introduced with a social abnormality, will judge it, and that's sort of like that's the drawback of having FE is that you don't know what to do with something that's different, to some extent.
I just have had, it's just my own trauma talking with FE because I've just had so many bad experiences with FE users that it's just an immature perspective I have on the function,
And I would also say that FE tends to compare people with each other as opposed to.
And that's my SI talking in the tertiary position, looking back to my past experiences to extrapolate forward.
Right. FE likes to compare people to each other and wants to draw a
I had one girlfriend in the past who was an ESFJ, so it was like always just like I just wanted to sit on my computer and do whatever I was doing, but we always had to go out and go socialize and everything. And it was always an inferiority complex she was trying to instill, because it was like you're just not being charming enough or whatever.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was just
There's
very,
like a set of
very
and
uncomfortable.
then that's a shallowness, I think, that doesn't embody FE itself, but there's a shallowness there that can happen.
Yeah.
But I think
growing up around FE users, it was always like if I would say something weird, it was always a laughter response or like a, it was like what was funny,
like a stifled
what was funny about that?
Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't trying to be funny.
Yeah. So it doesn't know what to do with like something that's abnormal. But I think the best of FE can be a very accommodating and very much.
Yes, I agree. When it's mature, it's not about conforming.
It's when it's mature, it's about being nurturing.
Yes,
about being kind of like
loving.
These are all I have. I can have as many. Everyone's my child, kind of a sense.
Yes, that I agree. When it's mature, and in many cases it's immature, but when it's mature, that's great.
Yeah,
the person recognizes its limitations. Because the immature FE user is just going to be like, FE is truth.
Oh, yeah.
FE is truth. And it's the only truth, right? And that's derived through social norms. And it's like,
not only is it the truth, but anything that diverts from the truth, I will control. I'll stamp that shit out, right?
Exactly, right.
And so that's the evil of FE.
There is an underlying malice almost to it if it's power seeking, and it just makes me very uncomfortable because I can see to the bottom of what kinds of psychological effects it can have on a person who's immature.
Well, the stereotype is FE's like the host of the party.
But if it's immature, it's the controlling host.
Yes, and if it's mature, then it's the host that brings everyone water and tries to make sure that everyone is okay.
Yeah,
and.
I mean, I can think of 1,000 responses to this video that will criticize that perspective on FE, but I mean, I think it's
maybe we just need more time to develop a more nuanced opinion on it, just because I think
we both went through a period of just outright, what is the word for it? God damn it, what's the word for it?
We were subjugated to an FE user.
Yeah, we grew up with parents that were both immature, like FE users and TE users. So we just have negative, we just come up with a negative view of both.
Well, they've matured as they've grown older, but we just have had our experiences with people who we know what
are immature with the function.
We just are different from them. And so we see what's ugly about them, just as I'm sure they see what's ugly about us. That's kind of how differing types can rub each other the wrong way.
Yeah, for sure. But we went through a period of bohemianism, both of us. And we've adapted, but we're still pretty much bohemians at heart. So, and that's almost an anti-FE kind of way of thinking and being. So we're just bohemians in that way. And so when we're talking about FE, it's about conformity, which is the poison to the proper bohemian.
Yeah. Well, I like FE users if it's secondary. I like ISFPs or ISFJs.
I do envy their ability to like construct themselves in social situations, and then maybe even if it's well developed and the FE user is smart, and even strategize socially.
Yeah.
But other than that.
Yeah. Well, and then just they're the matriarchs and patriarchs, in some sense. I mean, so that's great.
Better when they're matriarchs because they actually have a feminine kind of sensibility about them.
Yeah.
Worse when they're patriarchs, in which case it's all about control, social control based on norms. Do you remember the movie American Beauty? Kevin Spacey is your typical in that movie, like the ENFP, right? I mean, no doubt.
Oh, wanting to throw away his whole life.
Nonconformity, individualistic values, ideation, individualistic self-actualization. That's what the movie's about, is him breaking away from the conformist kind of white picket fence, corporate job life, and then trying to find if there's a truth beyond that is unique to him and is more meaningful than the misery that his life was producing in that. So, but the typical immature patriarch FE user in that movie is the neighbor who ultimately kills him at the end, right? The Marine guy who has homosexual feelings that he repressed and then comes out and then he kills him.
Yeah, well, okay, and then there's not
to say that they end up being like that type of person.
Yes. Well, there's also this.
So my dad's an ESFJ, so I intimately know how they can be immature.
Well, just as they adhere to social norms, they also create them too. So,
That's the paradox of it, though, that they don't think that social norms are created by individuals. They don't, right? They just think that they exist and that they're like messages from God or some sort of forbidden, untouchable truth. Whereas they're not. They're all relative to a local circumstance and a local culture,
Yeah.
And they're subjective and they're derived by humans and everything else. So we won't go deeper into FE because that's my FE being aware enough to know that that's not going to play well. So anyway,
TI is next.
Okay, so TI and U. What is TI and U?
Well, TI, I don't really use.
How do you use it?
I don't know if I would say I use it. It's more I understand it and I understand the strengths of it. I think for me, it's more like when presented with so TI is like, when I think of TI, I almost think of like it's like a cloud of thought, and it's like a 3-dimensional.
It's an internal model.
It's an internal model of some idea or
and more than a schematic.
Yes. And so for me, it's more of something that I understand the usefulness of as a TE user. I get that model, I cut it, and then I see the cross section of it or whatever, and try to find what I can glean from it in the most efficient way. And given that you and we have another friend, I'm surrounded by TI users. And so I really appreciate that, because for me, and I think I'm appreciated for my ability to just cut through things and be,
you're surrounded by TI users, like probably annoyingly, because I'm one, Alex is one, Parker is one.
Yeah.
Your dad is one.
Yeah. We have a lot of TI users. I have a lot of TI users.
I don't know why we've both gotten lucky, because we just have an overabundance of TI in our friend group.
So I think for me I'm in the abnormal situation of appreciating that function more than someone else would, who's an ENFP or self-identifies with this function.
Yeah, but I actually think that it's not as weak as you might think it is in you, because
if you're surrounded by something all the time, then
if you were to be tested on TI, an intelligence test or something, you'd probably do well.
Yeah, but I'd be annoyed the whole time.
Yeah, you'd probably be annoyed.
Like having to use TI is kind of an annoying feat for me. So, again, I will read.
It does feel like hair splitting to the non-TI user.
Yes. Again, it's like,
which to TI does not feel like hair splitting at all.
For you?
No, it does not.
No, it's sake of thinking as opposed to thinking for the sake of having a goal.
I like this one system, this one iteration of MBTI that says that it's about accuracy, which I think is accurate.
Sure, yeah.
And
it's course correcting.
Yeah, so that's my TIing their judgment of TI.
Yeah, another thing that I think of is that TI is like an algorithm in a way. Like it's the way that the process of TI happens to me. Like we think of the Android or something like that. Like the dominant TI user is like an Android come to life. Yeah. And that's kind of how
well, that's what Michael Pierce's analogy is. I mean, he thinks that it's like you were some sort of computational slave that was like engineered for that purpose, but then you escape and your only goal is to just then experience life as a human, which I think that's a very INFJ perspective on the INTP.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, it's just like, if I'm talking or if you're talking or if things are happening, I'm just aware of when things conflict or contradict with each other, and then I can point those out. Or there's the internal modeling too.
Well, and then there's the bringing up of just spitballing in general.
That's any though. Right? Well, because the ISTP is less.
Any in combination with TI.
Although ISTPs have NI, so they're very ideational. But that's what I always, if I could be any other type, I would choose ISTP. Which should arouse all the ISTPs out there, because that's exactly what they would want to hear any other type say.
Yeah.
Because they really do think they're the best type if you meet them. They always have that, like, I love, ISTP. I'm a big ISTP guy. But anyway, like they've got the TI there, but then it's backed up by SE. So it's like they're interfacing with SE, but it's like a TI awareness with SE. And it's
we can transition to talking about SE now, which is.
Yeah, right. So, SE would be then my like almost the weakest.
Yeah, and for
And
me,
then
it's
in you, it would be similarly.
yeah, it's I think to me like SE
Oh yeah,
is
SE
sort
would
of
be your weakest.
it's my weakest. If any of this is real, SE is like the to me it's like the definitive seeking experience. And I think actually in a similar vein to NI being a mystery to me, SE is also a mystery to me in some ways.
Oh yes, SE is a complete mystery to me.
So it's hard for me to exactly characterize it, but what I think of is people who are like the dominant SE users are driven by wanting to experience things.
Yes, very much
So
so.
I think of like, for
The
example,
adventure of experience is their primary.
yeah. So where like, so I think of using Molly for some reason. That's something I think of like.
Yeah, we can only experience SE through drugs. As
I
weak
guess
SE
that would
users.
be our experience with it.
We would
So-
only be able to experience. I don't even want to mention that in this video because I don't want it to get taken down. But
right. Well,
it won't unless we're using them, which we don't. But
well, I'm not sure what the rules are, but
whatever. Who
I
cares?
think we're fine.
No, yeah, that's really. I can only experience SE through trying to abstract about what it is.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
experience it physically. I wish I could. I mean, it sounds like a very powerful function.
It's hard. It's really hard for me to even think of what to say about it.
It's like being so engaged with the opportunities of the surrounding environment.
So okay, here's one. I think
which to me only occurs in little blips of consciousness where I'm suddenly like, oh yeah, I could go do that right now. That'd be fun, and then it immediately vanishes.
Yeah. So I think of people who are into sports and stuff. Like it's to me, it's like
it can be very athletic.
It almost pushes the boundaries of what your body can do and what your body can experience in some ways, and
pushing the boundaries of life. They end up being like hedonists and entertainers and stuff like that. And hedonists in a positive sense, not the negative sense that most people apply to it. Being hedonistic is a very good thing.
And I think dominant SE users live for like what's happening next, but not in a because they are looking to the future in the same way that NE is, but they're more concerned with
unlike NE though, they're looking toward the present.
Okay, maybe if
present
any
possibilities.
Maybe if any is the endless stream of future possibilities, SE is the endless stream of present possibilities.
Yeah, that's why I think it's an enviable function to have.
So it's like the most like
it's good for achiever types,
Sure, or people who are maximizing
and experiencers, right?
Like they can maximize every moment for like what it's worth.
They certainly probably. I mean, that's and ultimately we should if by the logic of the universe that we live in, it'd be better if we all had SE.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had anyone that I've been able to definitively say is a dominant SE user. There's like a couple people where I suspect.
Yeah.
I had like an old roommate who I think was
my siblings are all SE users. So I know what they look like.
I think they're all generally, I don't have any problems with them. They're all cool people, I tend to relate to them in their energy level because I think unlike someone who has, say, dominant FE or dominant TE, they have a way of producing their own kind of buoyancy, in the same way that any would. They're very kind of like
they're energetic.
They're energetic people, but
and they have to be SE.
But it's not in a way I think that's overbearingly, or maybe it can be. I don't know.
SE is about action, right? So how do you relate to action? And how do you take action then as a weak SE user? You don't, right? It's not you're not as action results, get it done.
Are you saying physically or are you saying,
I'm saying in general,
in any sense?
Because apparently it's about follow through, but I think other functions can be associated with follow through too.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I do get things done, but it's not like I'm always thinking of what I can get done next, I guess.
Yeah, or doing it rather than ideating about it.
Like, okay, maybe SE is about the process of doing itself. I'm usually thinking about what the product of the doing is going to be, and then along the way, I appreciate the process, but it's never about the process itself. I mean, any superhuman. Because I feel like with SE types, it's like action, little
contemplation, a little strategy reflection. Then for other types, it's all strategy, reflection, no action. It's like a superhuman would be action and reflection joined into one union, So
Yeah.
then you act out your ideas and your, so I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe SE can also be compared to SI. So one thing that I think of with I associate is like, okay, getting a tattoo. I think an SE user would be more likely.
Perfect example.
I think getting an SE user would be more
It's
likely
very
to
SE weak NI and weak TE.
Yeah, I think an SE user would be more likely to get a tattoo for the sake of the experience versus an SI user who would get a tattoo for what it means to them, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's a combination of both there, but I'm just saying
FI can get tattoos.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is what is more likely, but like I should recharacterize it. SI would want to get a tattoo to remember something, in remembrance of something, right?
Yes.
And SE is more about just getting the experience of having that, I want to get a tattoo. It's like I think of a bucket list or something. Like, well, you go things.
Yes, they're bucket list people.
Skydiving. Extreme. Like maybe it can be extreme, but
I have fondness. I have utmost fondness for SE, for sure.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's a not something I think my description is very poor because these are just things that I vaguely have seen in other people.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
So
we can only define our shadow functions by proxy.
Yeah.
Is that all of them?
That's all the functions.
Yeah. Okay.
This has been fun talking about them all.
I feel like that's a good. I don't feel like I've had any new insights about what they are, but I think I've been able to verbalize some insights that I already had.
Yeah, it's been good to kind of get all these things out there and like have a nice little analytical NE conversation about like personality types.
Yeah, for sure. I guess what I would then we probably would wrap it up now. That was a good conversation. Maybe this will become a series that I do or that we do where we're interviewing different types, but we don't have many friends.
Who are in MBTI.
Who would even be willing to be subjected to that kind of.
Well, it'd be more of just like trying to type them by asking them a series of questions.
Yeah, we have those we've typed. Whether they'd even ever consider being willing to do something as ridiculous as this or subject themselves to that kind of a psychoanalysis, I doubt. I don't know, I can't think of anybody. Maybe it'll become a series though if I force it with my weak SE.
Yeah, but for now, it's been fun to just kind of run through everything and. Maybe we could talk more in depth later.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, guys, thank you for watching, and thank you for tuning into the INTP stream.